We need Julian Assange. And one thing I want to say to you today is, it is not only that he is the victim of torture, it is not only that his life is at stake, it is not only we want to save him from a dreadful injustice, we also want to save him because the world needs Julian Assange as a symbol and fighter for liberty in these times.
That was Craig Murray at the very top of the show, a speech he gave at St. Pancras Church back in December 2000 and I believe 19 in London. And I'm Randy Credico live on the fly here on the Progressive Radio Network with a very special Assange Countdown to Freedom. It's so special that our guest is Craig Murray, who's special enough, who hasn't granted an interview since he was released from prison a few months back, or actually 5 weeks back. And this is his first one. And it's so special that I have a co-host who's joining me today in this interview, and that is Roger Waters. So sit back, we're gonna play a little bit of music here. This is Supertramp. It's called Logical Song because Craig Murray alludes to it in one of his books, his memoir, Murder at Samarkand, that he was called the Logical Man. And so here we go. Here's a little Supertramp, and we'll be right back with Craig Murray and my co-host, the great Roger Waters.
Life was so wonderful, a miracle. Oh, it was beautiful, magical. And all the birds in the trees they be singing so happily, oh joyfully, oh playfully, watching me. But then they sent me away, teach me how to be sensible, logical.
Okay, we're back. I'm Randy Credico live on the fly with two very special guests. One is a guest, the other one is my co-host. We all know Roger, who co-hosted last week and did a fabulous job. I asked him to come back today because we are with, I must say, over the last 5 years, my most consistent and favorite guest, and that is the great human rights crusader, author, historian, ex-diplomat, you name it, our man in the gallery, Craig Murray. Craig, I just want to thank you for taking the time. It's been a long time. It's been, I think, actually one-on-one about 5 months just before you went to Sawton prison. Is that it?
Yeah, Sawton, yeah.
Yes.
What? How do you pronounce it?
Sawton.
Sawton. Aye, because it would be in Bonnie, Scotland. Is that right? Aye. Sawton. Because Randy asked me, and I said, well, you'd pronounce that Sawton, you know, a bit like Saunton Sands or something, which doesn't have a GH in it, but you know what? Sawton. Aye.
Anyway, all right. Well, listen, I had the two of you on together right after Julian Assange was denied, or the order to keep him here was rescinded by the Supreme Court. We were all together. That was a massive show with six. But with you, Craig, it's been, I had you just days before you went into Sawton prison. And
Sawton.
All right. I got it. So, Craig, you've been back for, I think, like 4 weeks now. Has it been a tough adjustment, or did you come out hitting the ground running?
Well, 2 weeks of that have been Christmas and New Year, so there's a very good deal of alcohol involved in the last fortnight of it. But no, it's not been personally as difficult as, as I think people thought it would be for me. The first couple of days just seemed absolutely fine and normal. I then went through a period of about a week when things did seem a bit difficult, and it's hard to describe. It's as though I had sensory overload, because I'd been locked for absolute minimum of 22 and a half hours a day, and sometimes more than that, in this tiny cell for 4 months, seeing really nothing, visually. And so suddenly the sort of richness of normal experience and seeing all the different things you normally see, the sights and the sounds and the smells, just my brain found it all quite hard to take in after a couple of days. And I did go through a week of adjustment that was a little hard, but I wouldn't want to claim, I was suffering greatly or anything along those lines. It was great to be back in my family again, and then we were into the festive season, and I've always been a festive kind of person. So we had quite a good time. It's been very good to be back in my family again.
That article that's in craigmurray.org.uk that I read earlier today is really a stunning, ghastly retelling of your experience inside that prison. It took you a while to actually gather your thoughts and reflect on that episode.
Yeah, and frankly, it took me quite a while to write it, because I was putting it off and starting bits and not going back to it and whatever. And it was quite a painful experience. It wasn't pleasant, and it's a very dark place. And I now have, prisoners who became friends of mine who are still in there and still suffering in this quite appalling system. So it's quite hard psychologically to think about. And I, having got out of it, I wasn't really too keen on thinking much more about it, if you see what I mean. Something in a sense you'd like to put behind you, but I thought it needed to be retold and explained in detail, and that's what I've started to do in the first installment that I got out today.
Roger, you want to follow up on that?
Well, I was just reading it very quickly. I've had a weird day, and so I didn't have a chance to read the whole thing earlier, and I wish I had, because the odd little bits that I was speed reading, going as fast as I can to pick up as much as I can. And I would have liked to have spent several minutes over your first couple of pages talking about the bloke who came demanding a Bible from you in an irritating way, banging on your cell door or whatever it was that he did. And I couldn't quite figure out at the end of it whether he wanted the Bible to rip up to, you thought it might be to roll a joint in, or to soak in some other substance, to, I don't know, acid or so, I've no idea. But what crossed my mind was maybe he needed to wipe his bum. But I thought, I'm sure that can't be it, because otherwise no Christian would ever speak to Craig Murray ever again as in the whole of history, because you know how unforgiving the human race is and how bad they are at humor or the thought of anything like that. But then listening to you talk just now, talking about it now, obviously when we hear you sort of almost apologizing for the fact that you were only in Sockton, or however it's pronounced, for 4 months, and 22 and a half hours a day or whatever. And I think of my experience and how I can't even imagine. And we've all said this before 1,000,000 times about Julian, obviously, and he's still in Belmarsh, banged up 23 hours a day. And then suddenly this morning, the news comes through that whatever our Palestinian friend's name is, who finally did a deal with the Israelis, who said, we'll let you out on the 26th of February then, sort of, you win. And he went, all right, then I'll have a cup of tea and a bacon sandwich. Not bacon, sorry, I'll have a sandwich. You know, he's been on a hunger strike for 141 days. I was once on a hunger strike for 1 day, and it was years ago for Shaka Amo in Guantanamo, because and it was in, I can't remember. Well, of course it was. What is it when you do something for a very short period of time? You're in something with them. Anyway, I did it, and actually, you think, well, I don't usually eat during the day anyway, or it's only till tomorrow morning or so. You don't realize actually how used we are to our liberty and to having something to eat and not being out in the freezing cold and not having somebody beating us half to death every minute or kicking our door down. All those things that we in our middle class English way take absolutely for granted, and maybe Randy, it less so. It's a bit more, it feels a bit more violent here than it is in England. But
yeah,
sorry.
Well, Craig, what is your response to that analysis?
Yeah, I think the conditions in which I was kept were very, very similar to the conditions Julian is kept in. And I can't imagine how he's, managed to put up with it for the couple of years he's been in Belmarsh, let alone all the time before that when he was confined in the embassy. And in Julian's case, it's of course much, much worse because there is no end. There's no end in sight. It's sort of interminable. There's no sign of a release date. And I think psychologically, that must be extremely difficult. I got by ticking off the days, both literally as well as metaphorically. I had a notebook in which I wrote down the days to tick off. I sort of kidded myself, but actually it was a note of dates I'd written to tick off all my medications as I take them, as opposed to really ticking off my jail time. But I was, I'm sure, actually ticking off my jail time. And knowing when it was going to end was very, very important. The torture of not knowing when it's going to end must be awful. And so I think psychologically, Julian's in a much worse place than I was. But of course,
sorry, go.
Well, of course, physically it can't compare with the appalling conditions Palestinians suffer in Israeli detention, for example. That's an entirely other level. And while I do feel a great deal of solidarity with them, I can't pretend in any way my experience was as dreadful as the things they suffer.
But what was the toll like on your family, Craig? I mean, I was in contact. Nadira did the show. Being separated from them for that continuous period of time, it must have, because I'm trying to, compare it to what Stella Morris is going through. Just that 4-month period of time, what kind of toll did it take on them psychologically?
I think it was very difficult for them. They were very, very worried about me and how I was going to get through it, because I do suffer from a number of unpleasant medical conditions, and they were worried bluntly. They were worried I would die in prison, because I wouldn't be able to manage those medical conditions properly in jail, and they were terrified for me. I think, and that was a big toll on them. But there's also, of course, the thing that I suppose anyone in prison suffers, which is you worry about your children. I was worried about Cameron, who was just starting high school, and you're worried that other children will taunt and bully them because their father is in jail. You worry about all those aspects of life. In fact, none of that did happen. I'm happy to say we had tremendous support from the local community and from neighbours that I didn't know before, like the gentleman who lives at the back of our house by our back fence, got in touch to support and sent me a nice card. Other neighbours rallied round. Other parents of some of Cameron's school friends offered to help out with babysitting and things. So in fact, the community experience was good rather than bad for the family in the end. We ended up with better friends and neighbours than we had at the start. But the strains and stresses, I think, were pretty horrible. And almost the worst thing about being in jail is you're worried about what is happening about your family outside. The day that Cameron started at his new school, I just sat there absolutely all day worrying about him and how he was getting on. In fact, I wasn't there to talk to him before he went or to ask him how he got on when he came back and that kind of thing. Those everyday human things are the worst part of the experience, much more so than anything that physically happens to you.
I'm Randy Credico. You're listening to Randy Credico Live on the Fly. We are talking, Roger Waters and I, and we're co-hosting today, talking with Craig Murray. Craig Murray, I was able to leaf through your book, your epic book, Secunda Burns, Master of the Game, Master of the Great Game, and of course, Murder at Samarkand. By the way, that Secunda Burns, that character is the prototype for Flashman in the George MacDonald. He's the original Flashman, I think. Quite a character. People, if you haven't read it, go to Craig's website and access Secunda Burns. I'm going to switch it over. Roger, we're talking with Craig Murray. I'm going to throw the ball over to you.
Well, Flashman's Tom Brown's School Days, isn't it? Who wrote Tom Brown's School Days? Was Matthew Arnold the headmaster of rugby? Come on, Craig. Help me out here. Tom Brown's...
I was sorting out my bookshelves today by coincidence and moved a copy of Tom Brown's School Days from one shelf to another, but I can't remember off the top of my head who wrote it. Well, Matthew Arnold was a real person, yeah. Flashman wasn't. But Burns was definitely and undoubtedly one of the inspirations for Macdonald Fraser's character, and was also the inspiration for The Man Who Would Be King by Kipling. So he's a character who's featured more in fiction than he had previously in biography.
Interesting. I was very interested in what you were saying a minute ago about your community rallying round, and the bloke who lives over the fence at the bottom of the garden writing you a note, and so on and so forth. And I was interested in, I was constructing a drama in my head of, oh, maybe our neighbours read the paper, or maybe they know about Craig Murray because of your history in activism and because of you standing up to the British government when you either resigned or were removed from being an ambassador to Uzbekistan, or where was that where it was? I can't remember, but
yeah.
somewhere over there, anyway, some foreign country. Anyway, but the point I'm going to make is, and it's fiddling around with words. I see you're kind of surrounded by books, and words are important to us because they're the sort of basis of all philosophical discourse, the meanings of words, as we know. But why didn't Vladimir Ilyich, or whatever his name was, Lenin, call it communityism instead of communism? Because that's what it is at the behind all of the talk about the value of being alive on this flimsy planet and blah and blah and blah and all of that thing is the idea of community, and that we have feelings for one another within the community, and that we actually we may not even have a moral or legal or responsibility to look after one another, but we have a natural empathy with each other. So your bloke who lives over the fence sends you a card because he knows that he needs to express his love or admiration, or just the fact that you're the next door neighbor to you. And isn't that an interesting thing to come out of your experience. I mean, it struck me like like a crossbow bolt through the heart when you said that. I thought, wow, how powerful is that as an image of a way in a different direction? Sorry, go on.
No, I think that's right, and it's also another sign that, and it's hard to say it without sounding very bland and cliched, but that even the most difficult experiences in life usually have some benefits in terms of bringing enhanced wisdom and, in this sense, community resilience and community connection, which I think is very important. I had a conversation with the gentleman at Berkeley University, which Randy might tell me is pronounced Barclay. I'm never quite sure.
No, it's Berkeley. University
of Berkeley in America. Yeah. The famous psychiatrist who did the famous experiment where he had students turning dials, believing they were torturing one another.
Was that not Stanford?
Yes.
Sorry. It was Stanford, was it?
Yes, yes, it was Stanford, yes.
Yeah. Well, I was giving a lecture at the university alongside him, in fact, talking about the experience of torture in Uzbekistan and people's willingness in the civil service to go along with it. In effect, that other
Craig, you should tell Randy's viewers about the Stanford experiment, because a lot of people won't have ever heard of it or know, and it's really important that they know about it. I think. Would you mind just briefly?
I'm trying to remember the man's name. Stanley Mill something came to me, but it went away again. It essentially, and I can't recall the details of it immediately, but the students were instructed as part of a psychology experiment, as part of their course, to sit the other side of a pane of glass from somebody and turn up a dial, giving them an electric shock and making the pain worse and worse. And what the students were not aware they were actually the subject of the experiment. It was their willingness to inflict pain on someone when ordered to by an authoritarian figure like their psychology lecturer, which was being studied. And the study showed that the very large majority of people are willing to actually obey an order and inflict pain. In effect, there's more to it than that, but that was the basic.
I don't think they were students. I could be wrong about.
They were students. They were students that were participating in a program where they put some students inside of a makeshift prison cell, and then
that's a different experiment. You're confusing two.
All right, let's stick to this one here. Let them get to the point. There's two experiments there about the electric shocks.
Well, after the gentleman, who I'm pretty sure his name was Stanley, it'll come back to me one day. After we'd given our lectures, I was having dinner with him afterwards. And he said that what interested him about the Iraq War was that there had not been the public outrage at the war crimes and atrocities that there had been after the Vietnam War. And he referred to the My Lai massacre in Vietnam and the huge difference that had made to public opinion on the Vietnam War. And he said that it wasn't because of lack of information, and it wasn't because images weren't available. He said there were shocking images published in the media which were as horrible from Iraq as the images that had been published from the media over Vietnam. But they just hadn't had the same effect on public opinion. The public opinion had, over the course of 20 years, become desensitized. 40 years, I guess, had become desensitized in the United States. That people were no longer outraged by signs, by pictures of wounded children in the way they had been in previous decades. And he was working on the causes of that using psychological experimentation. And his hypothesis, which he was testing and which he believed stood, was that it was due to a general desocialization. It wasn't due to exposure to video games or more exposure to nasty images on TV. It was due to a general reduction in the feeling of human empathy in society. And he believed that the cause of that was desocialization and the fact that people just don't meet people as often anymore, that people no longer participate so much in community organizations, be it the Boy Scouts or trade unions or any other thing that gets people out meeting one another in the community. That people had much more become individual consumers, sitting at home eating TV dinners and receiving electronic information, and had stopped being able to relate to other people so much as human beings. It was a very fascinating conversation, and I think there's a great deal in it. That desocialization is a real problem in modern society. I apologize, that's probably quite a digression from where we were, but I think a valuable
I don't think
insight.
it is. Where we were, and I've found it here, his name was Stanley Milgram, and it was at Yale, okay? And they were not students, they were members of the public, the participants, and from lots of different strata of public, different occupations and so on, but an age range of 20 to 50 from a diverse range of occupations with varying levels of education. And the experiment was to see whether they would obey an authority figure. And it goes on and on, but it was Yale. The other one was Stanford, which was where you take students, divide them into guards and prisoners, and the ones you call guards because they behave appallingly, and the ones who you call prisoners, by and large, are coward and blah, blah, blah. But that's a completely different thing. This was Yale. Anyway, I just thought I'd look it up. Stanley Milgram. Well done, my son.
You know, you're talking about torture, Craig. In your memoir, Murder at Samarkand, I believe it's called. You chronicle what you saw there. And by the way, I just realized today that was made into a radio play on BBC Channel 4 radio in 2011. I'd love to get a copy of that radio play, Murder at Samarkand. Somebody played you. Were people, when you came up with that information, people came to you and you divulged it, was it the same people were insensate to what you had revealed within your own circles in the FCO?
Everybody senior in the FCO knew that extraordinary rendition was happening, that we were effectively in cooperation with, going along with, complicit in torture. So it wasn't that the information I was giving in official reports was unexpected or unknown. But what I was told was you weren't supposed to write this kind of thing down. It was a dirty little secret, which it wasn't the dumb thing to talk about. And people were, in general, very sympathetic to what I was saying. But the official line was that this wasn't happening, it was all untrue. Of course, as I reveal in my book, the advice from Foreign Office legal advisors was that it wasn't illegal to receive intelligence from torture as long as we didn't do the torture ourselves. And that while complicity in torture was illegal under the UN Convention Against Torture, as the legal advisors put it, the word complicit is opaque. And they thought that if we weren't feeding in specific questions to the torturers to ask, for example, but were just receiving the product of the torture sessions without giving specific direction, then we weren't complicit. So, I had all these angels dancing on the head of a pin discussions with people in the Foreign Office who managed to divorce themselves from the reality that we were talking about people, being raped with broken bottles and having boiling oil and boiling water poured over their bodies and those kind of things. So, they were able to hold these dry meetings on what complicity and torture actually meant, while staying psychologically somehow entirely divorced from what they were actually doing. And it was astonishing. And these were people I knew and I'd worked in the office for 20 years. These people I'd known for 20 years in some cases. And they were actually very nice people. But they just managed to put this sort of barrier between their comfortable upper middle class lives and what they were really involved with in the world. It was a very strange and disorienting experience.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So, Craig, what is it that separates you from them? This is a question. So everybody who goes into the diplomatic, you were in the diplomatic service, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
You were the ambassador, right, or whatever. So people who go into that line of work, it may be, I have no idea what your motivations were for taking a job like that, but whatever they were, you carried into the job with you certain convictions that you hold somewhere within yourself. This is why you are a hero, Craig, to the rest of us, is because you carried those convictions into a place where they're unusual. Can I put it that way? People are generally know that they are expected to toe a certain line, and that convictions about torture and right and wrong and caring about fellow human beings and all those things have to be left at the door when you turn up for work and you go into the office, and it's something that's understood. But you refute, it seems to me anyway, from what I've seen from the outside, you went, no, these are my convictions. I care about other people. I have empathy for other human beings. This is wrong. And I'm prepared to carry the can for my convictions. And you have. And it's made you a real hero to us. And I mean that very sincerely, obviously. But to them, what did they feel? All the ones who go, oh no, we're not allowed to talk about that, because how is it that they can't see how wrong it is what they're doing? And do the Yale experiments throw some light on that? Is it just that we've become inured to other people's suffering, and that we do as we're told? If there's somebody with 3 stripes on their arm or a pip on their shoulder or a wig, or they're called Sir somebody or other, that we just do what they tell us to do? I don't know. What is it? What made you different? Why were you different? Because you were, and you are, thank God. Not that there is a God.
It's a question I've been struggling with for the last 20 years, because I didn't think I was unusual. The peculiar thing was I thought I was the normal one, and that everyone else was acting strange. And I also thought, well, when I first came across the fact that we were involved with, complicit in terrible torture by the Uzbek security services, and people being flown into Uzbekistan in order to be tortured, I honestly thought, well, when I tell people in London about this, they will want to stop it. That really was my naive belief. I thought, well, once my fellow senior diplomats, once Jack Straw and Tony Blair know about this, of course they'll want to stop it. and when I discovered that they didn't want to stop it, and in fact were part of the reason it was happening, I was genuinely shocked. I really was. And when I found that the people I worked alongside in the Foreign Office, that no one else was prepared to stand up against it, I again was very shocked. There were only 4 people in the Foreign Office who left the service over the war on terror, the war in Iraq, and Extraordinary Rendition.
Robin Cook.
Other than I wasn't counting Robin, who wasn't actually in the Foreign Office anymore at the time, but
well, was in Parliament.
Elizabeth Wilmshurst, the deputy legal advisor.
Right.
There was me. There's a chap called Khan Ross, who worked at the United Nations for us. And there was one person whose name, sadly, I've never known, who was a clerk at a junior level who resigned in protest. But only 4 people out of the entire Foreign Office. Now, I should say 90% of the people in the Foreign Office were against the war in Iraq, viewed it as illegal, and were against torture and extraordinary rendition. But nobody was actually prepared to give up their job because of it. And people told themselves that, we are only civil servants. It's not our decision. The Prime Minister makes these decisions, the Foreign Secretary makes these decisions. And in a democracy, we just have to do what the politicians tell us. We're civil servants. We don't decide, which is a very comfortable thing to hide behind, because it removes all moral responsibility from you. And people, it's actually I was only obeying orders defense. And unfortunately, we have a huge amount of evidence as to just how very, very powerful that is in society, and that people are willing to go along with unspeakable things because their bosses tell them to do it. It's also to do with people wanting to keep their jobs, and in the Foreign Office in particular, I think, keep their social standing as well. That being part of a rather exclusive peer group is very important to people. I was very much an outsider. I joined in my year in the fast stream entry, which was only 22 people into the Foreign Office. And I was only 2 of those 22 had not gone to Oxford or Cambridge. I was one of only 2 who weren't Oxbridge. And I was the only one who wasn't public school. So so I was coming from a different place, literally as well as metaphorically from other people.
Well, how happy am I to hear that actually you may be providing evidence that not having been to a public school, which for the great unwashed where I live in the United States means a private school, not having been to a private fee-paying school set you apart from all the people who had, and in this case, in an extremely fundamental way, that you were still in control of your empathy for other human beings, unlike all the public school boys who have been taught that they're superior to all the nignogs and whatever all over the world at Eton or Harrow or wherever they've been to their private fee-paying school or whatever, and that they have an absolutely obligation to stick with the boys in the club and rule the world and to show these buggers how it's properly done. And that...
To throw this in, you also, both of you, come from your parents, Roger, were school teachers, public school teachers. And your father was a dock worker in Dundee, was it, or Montrose, and you had 12 brothers and sisters. So you both come from working class. Me too. And I think that must have had a big influence on you growing up, if I'm not correct, Craig.
This is I'm going to interrupt because, Craig, I think this is super important. What Randy is suggesting is that only the working classes can empathize. Well, it's not true, as we know, because we all know that love for our brothers and sisters transcends a lot of that.
I'm just saying that it helps out.
All right, okay.
Yeah, I think you're right in the Roger, in a sense of superiority is socialized into the ruling class. That they view themselves as a caste apart, and they don't really view people not in that caste as human in the same way, and they're not that worried about what happens to them. And I think that's a huge problem in society. And of course, it's a problem that's getting worse, because one thing that has happened in the course of all our lifetimes is that the gap between rich and poor, which was bad enough already, has actually grown larger and larger until the percentage of the world's wealth owned by very few individuals has become quite extraordinary. So I think all this is actually getting worse and not better, because vast accumulations of wealth are a social phenomenon. It's not natural. It's not a law of nature that allows it to happen. It's the laws governing commercial relations between people that allow somebody to accumulate $30 billion or whatever. And those laws governing commercial relations are enforced and instituted by states. And it's simply a matter that a political class has captured the institutions of the state and has enabled the creation of a legal framework enforced by state power that allows massive accumulation of wealth to those people. And there's no sign at all at the moment. We went through a brief period of human history after the Second World War for 20 or 30 years, when increasingly the power of the state was used, particularly in Western countries, to reduce inequality in society. That is almost not seen as a function of the state anymore. The state now exists to enable and protect vast accretions of wealth, and society, I think, has, in my view, in most respects, got very much worse in the last 40 or so years.
Well, you're completely right, of course, and the fact is, where I live in the United States of America, the state is not really a player because you can buy it. Citizens United provided the law by which where they finally, it went to the Supreme Court and they said, this is perfectly acceptable. You are now allowed to buy the government. There it is. It's written into the law of the land. And it's what the founding fathers always wanted. Everything about constitutional law in the United States points to the fact that the founding fathers never had any intention of ever allowing the people to have any power at all. It was to be kept with them, with the land. That's what the Electoral College is all about. That's why they don't allow even the pretense of a democracy with a popular vote meaning anything in a presidential election, for instance. It doesn't. It's kind of irrelevant. And it goes through both parties. This isn't a Republican thing, but there are only two parties. And Ralph Nader never had a chance. Neither did anybody else who's not part of the machine. And we know that. But the problem is it not, that they're destroying the planet in their unseemly scrabble to accumulate all this unseemly wealth. So between them, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and the rest of them are destroying the planet that we live on in order to build huge piles, trillions of dollars in untaxed accumulation of wealth. That's what, and they're doing that because it makes them feel good, I guess. Maybe they all have very small, I've no idea. It's not, I'm not amateur psychology is my shtick. But this is what's going on, and it's going on in front of our very eyes, all around us, all the time. Which is why I won't go down that thing. Except it's important, which is why it's so important that there are whistleblowers like you and Julian and Stephen Donziger, who's another friend of mine, and blah 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 blah, who go, this is wrong. You can't kill all these Ecuadorian rainforest people, in the Amazon in Ecuador just to make a few $1 billion. No, you can't. It's wrong. It's wrong. You can't. And they go, fuck you. We will destroy you, or we'll get it, or whatever.
Craig,
Hang on, I haven't finished. I have one more thing to say, and it is this. So Silicon Valley, I just read today, yet another huge Twitter account closed down by some political leaning body, probably pro-Palestinian or something, and they just shut you down. Suddenly you cannot be part of the conversation. And that's why Randy is so important. And the fact, Craig, that you and I are allowed to have our say to the 300 people, or it'll be a tiny number, maybe a couple of thousand people we're talking.
Oh, much more than that. We got a long
All right,
way.
much more than that. Give credit where credit's due. 20,000, 30,000, a tiny number of people in any event. And we're having a conversation which, whether you agree with anything that we say here or not, is a real conversation based upon what we feel in our hearts. And Craig is he's an ex-British UK ambassador to Uzbekistan. He's written books about what went on there, ignored, So slowly we are being squeezed into a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller space till when Mark Zuckerberg and the others have had their way, we won't be there anymore.
Craig?
And then the rest of you are all. Trust me on this.
All right.
Sorry, Craig. It's Craig. We want to get back to Craig.
All right. Craig?
Yeah. No, I think that last point is extremely important. And let me give you an illustration of it. When Randy and I were queuing outside Belmarsh prison to get into Julian's court hearing at 5 o'clock in the morning in January 2019, and very cold it was too. And I was writing my first reports from the start of Julian's hearings. Those reports were getting audiences of 20 to 30 million around the web. Then by the time we came round to the more extensive hearings in the autumn, and I was filing in exactly the same way reports onto my blog, detailing each day's proceedings, the audience was down from 20 million a day to 20,000 a day. And quite simply, the gatekeepers, the internet, had closed it off. Twitter had closed it off. It doesn't matter how many followers it looks like I have on Twitter. In fact, very few were actually getting shown each report as it came on. Facebook was doing the same thing to me, and Google was doing it. So if you Googled the Assange trial, you no longer saw my blog anywhere on the results. And it was amazing. It was just astonishing to see it. WikiLeaks have suffered this for years. I mean, they officially have 2 million Twitter followers, and they put out a tweet, and you see it's got 27 likes, and makes you realize it's not actually getting to many of their 2 million followers. There was a brief period at the start of this millennium, and it was a period in which Julian and WikiLeaks really flourished, when we thought that internet freedom was the answer, that the internet was the way we could reach a mass global audience very quickly. But the powers that be have reacted to that. They've reacted to that by essentially instituting very popular and successful gateways to the internet that most people use. So most people get to their content via Twitter and Facebook, and then instituting massive censorship on those gateways. And it works. And one of the reasons I'm so keen to see Julian released is I'm I think that Julian, with his intellect and his particular knowledge of the internet, is one of the people we need to lead us to a new period of internet freedom that finds ways to get round these gatekeepers. That to me is almost the most important task that needs doing at the moment.
Well, listen, wait. I've got to take a break here. To some of our listeners, we're going to go away, but we're going to come back and we're going to talk about Julian Assange and what you have been writing about, your dispatches from both sides of the extradition hearing, one in Belmarsh, the other in the Old Bailey, and we'll talk about that. And just when we come back, folks, to some of our listeners, we're going to go away, and we'll come right back. This is some music by Roger Waters in London a year and a half ago, and we'll be back on the other side of that for a continuation.
So you think you can tell heaven from hell, blue skies from pain? Can you tell it from a cold steel red, a smile from a veil? Do you think you can tell? And if they get you to trade your heroes for ghosts, hot ashes for trees, and hot air for cool breeze, cold comfort for change, and then you exchange a walk-on part of the war for a lead role. Same old fear, and I wish that you were here.
Okay, we're back. I'm Randy Credico, Randy Credico Live on the Fly. We are now in what I call Assange Countdown to Freedom, which I have been doing, Craig. You did the initial season way back in 2017, early on. I mean, you were on the show a few times in 2016, maybe 4 or 5 times. And so here we are, 5 years later. And, you know, I don't know where we're going from here.
Well, hang on, Randy, I'm going to interrupt you because I wanted to say something before you.
Well, go ahead, do that.
I'm fucking well going to, because this is so important, right? Because, and Craig sort of led us down this path. And so I want to stay on the path. And the fact is that he's quite right. This is why Julian Assange, why we have to keep fighting and fighting and banging our heads against the brick wall of the ruling classes intransigence, because they want Julian dead, because he is the potential leader that Craig is talking about. He is so dangerous to Big Brother. So if I can borrow from George Orwell here just for a minute, this is what we're talking about. This was the prediction from 1948 when he wrote the novel, that the Ministry of Truth would tell us what we're allowed to believe and what we're not allowed to believe. And it's exactly what Craig and I have been batting backwards and forwards about, what we learn when we're in public school, being taught that we're one of the elite and that we have to rule the world and that we have certain responsibilities. But it's narrow. It's a it's a narrow window. Okay, so that's it. That's all I want to say. They're trying to kill Julian because he's such a valuable revolutionary, because what is his great revolutionary idea? He believes that we, the people, should be told the truth about things. This is such a radical idea that he deserves to die. And they're not kidding, they're killing him. And they will go on till they succeed, unless somehow we can persuade people that this is what's happening and that it has to be stopped at all costs, because we need Julian Assange as a leader for us.
Let me ask, I want to pick up on that and ask Craig. You know, I was hopeful in 2016, 2017 that things would work itself out in the the judicial system, but it hasn't. It's so obvious now that, I hate to say it, looks like he's not getting out. They have no intention, the way I look at it, of letting him out under any circumstances. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I agree. The game's a bogey. Basically, there seems to me nothing that's going to happen in a court that is going to make any difference to whether Julian is free or not. The only thing that would free him would be a political decision to do so, and there is no sign at all that Biden or Johnson has any interest in releasing him. The state wants him dead. The powerful in the state view him as a serious challenge. And I think Julian has been more effective than anybody in the past in revealing the crimes of the state and in undermining the power of the state. He is the biggest enemy they have, and they're correct in their perception. They're not wrong. Julian is the most dangerous enemy they have, and the biggest challenge to their wrongdoing. So it doesn't surprise me they want him dead. The only question is whether we can reach a stage in the world of realpolitik where they see it as more to their personal advantage to release him, that releasing him would enhance their ability to hang on to power than to keep him in jail. And I think that's the real calculation. I don't think it's anything to do with anything the lawyers say in court. Painstakingly, though I've been documenting what the lawyers say in court, I think that whole thing is a charade. It's a fake. It's a show trial, just in the way Stalin held show trials. It's nothing to do with actual justice.
Well, who's putting the pressure on these judges? Like, I know this guy, Sir Alan Duncan, people are wondering about, to solve the extraction from the Ecuadorian embassy back in April 2019, and is close friends with the head justice of the British system in the UK and Wales. I mean, who is it Who is it that's influencing these judges? Obviously, they're not making their own decisions. Or maybe they are.
I don't think the way that level of society operates, I don't think people have to be told what to do. I think they know what to do. They know what the class to which they belong wishes them to do. Alan Duncan, incidentally, is a mystery because he indeed made some vicious public statements about Julian. On the other hand, he's been one of the very few senior politicians, particularly one of the very few senior Conservative politicians, who has always been willing to take a firm stand in support of the Palestinian people. So he's a complex and interesting character who and the motivations for what he's doing at any one moment in time are maybe not always what they seem. I'm not quite sure that the simple demonization of Duncan that I hear from fellow Assange supporters is necessarily completely accurate. But as I say, in general, I think there's a kind of collective consciousness among the ruling class, particularly in the UK, but not only in the UK. And by and large, they don't have to be told what to do. They pick up, what the government would wish to happen, and that's what they do without anybody issuing any specific instruction.
Roger?
I'm sure Craig is right about that. And I'm so glad to hear him say that about Sir Alan Duncan, because I am firmly in the Craig Murray not quite sure camp, only because of the outing of Alan Duncan as a target of the Israeli embassy, or whatever it's called, in London, in the Al Jazeera documentary, The Lobby, where he was shown as one of the chief targets of their smearing campaigns, because at some point, I've never actually seen what he said in support of the Palestinians, but I know that it happened because, that is an arena in which I've been involved for some years and whatever. So it is. When all this stuff came up about Alan Duncan and the Lord Chief Justice and calling Julian a worm, I thought, it can't be the same bloke that the Israelis are attacking, can it? So obviously Craig shared the same confusion, or maybe not. He probably knows a lot more about it than I do. But so anyway, fuck Alan Duncan. That's another, we can shift him to one side. Well, I'm not sure what you're asking me now. There's so much. Craig Murray has brought so much truth to our table, which is great to be there. And, because he's been doing it and he's been in the corridors of power. He's watched it all happening. He's carried the can of his convictions to jail and back for us, for we the people, as has Julian, except he's still in jail. Hopefully he will carry that can of his convictions back into the mainstream of society so that he can do his work. Whether he can do his work anymore remains to be seen, but I certainly hope he can. Because imagine a world without anybody blowing whistles. No whistleblower. Imagine no Daniel Ellsberg, no Daniel Hale, no Chelsea Manning, no Julian Assange, nobody saying diddly squat about it. Most of the great unwashed, where I live in the United States, would believe the transparent nonsense that the United States cares about democracy, freedom, liberty, human rights, and all those things they pretend to care about. It's only because of the whistleblowers and truth tellers that some of us who are privy to this information know that the ruling class in the United States wants nothing of the kind. It wants profit for itself, all 10 of them. Maybe there's 20, but no more than that. 20 people probably control the whole of America, and all they want to do is stuff their money full of cash. And one of the main ways that they have of making the money to stuff their pockets with is to go to war and kill brown people in foreign countries. It's hugely, hugely profitable.
Right.
And that's why they do it. And this is the disgusting apology for a world that we live in. And
Right.
Julian was trying to explain that to us.
I'll let you riff on that, Craig.
Actually, I want to go backwards, Randy, because there's one thing I need to say so that your listeners don't think I'm a terrible liar, which is having Googled him during a break, I plainly could not have had dinner with Stanley Milgram in Berkeley in 2006 because he died in 1984. So the psychology professor who was explaining to me his theory as to why people were not so shocked about the horrors of the Iraq War as they had been the Vietnam War was not Stanley Milgram. It was, I think, probably just somebody who worked with him. There's an interesting Maoist in the United States called Larry Everest, and you need to track down Larry Everest and invite him to be on your show one day and give you a Maoist perspective. And he was someone else I recall who was there at that dinner, and he would perhaps be able to tell you who I was having dinner with. And I would, as I appear to be having dinner with a ghost, I'd be quite interested to know what the actual answer is to this rather strange fault in my memory.
Yeah.
What's his name?
It was Sir Alan Duncan Sr. But we'll look up Larry Everest. I want, before we continue on, Roger, I just want, getting back to the Alan Duncan, the judges. I mean, there was a time when there were judges going back to 1772. I know it's apocryphal when Lord Mansfield said that the air was too pure for there to be slavery in the UK. But they did deny the extradition or the rendition of a slave that was on a boat at Somerset versus Stewart back on. I mean, back then, there were judges that stood up. Is there nobody like Lord Mansfield today in that entire judicial system?
There was probably a vested interest, sorry to butt in, but I'm sure if there was a judge in 1772, right, who stood up for a black bloke on a boat, he did it because he had no vested interest in slave labor and the plantations in the colonies, where it was the absolute basis of the beginning of the American economy, as is well known now and well documented and whatever. It may well be that slavery was not convenient to the ruling classes in Great Britain. I've no idea, but I suspect if it had been, they would have been probably, the idea of a judge in high places in any organized plutocracy or kleptocracy or hierarchy or monarchy or of any kind who doesn't toe the line in some way is pretty hard to swallow in my book.
Your thoughts, Craig?
I think I should point out that William Murray, Lord Mansfield, was a member of the Clan Murray, and we're and therefore I feel absolutely obliged to defend him, quite possibly an ancestor of mine. No, but he almost certainly didn't say that thing about leaving the heir of England, because it didn't actually appear anywhere until Macaulay wrote it down 40 or 50 years later, and I think Macaulay made it up. But he did make a judgment that you couldn't keep a slave in England, and that did indeed help spark the American Revolution, led by people whose prime motivation was the fact they wanted to keep their slaves, which is another fact which history has conveniently largely forgotten.
Also, is
Definitely
he's
was the
married Lord Hamilton, or whatever his fucking name was, if he's a proper Scotsman, would never have dreamt of giving credence to English fucking anything. Because English hair, my God, how does that compare with Scottish hair? Eh?
It's a convoluted decision, and it took years for it to be resolved. There was a very famous, I think, either an Irish or Scottish lawyer that took the case. It was a huge case. But I saw your speech at St. Pancras Church recently again, and you talked about the foundation of the church. Use it as a metaphor for the foundation of British law. And you looked at the pillars inside that cathedral or church, whatever it's called. And you were able to say, well, this was paid for. All of the institutions like that were given money by what you would call slave owners, or those who trafficked in slavery, are involved in other unseemly activity, Craig.
Yeah, it's something we are only just beginning to actually come to terms with in the UK, which is the extent to which the profits of empire and the profits of slavery financed so much that is around us. And there in that church, there were memorial tablets to families in different colonies at the time the tablets were erected, which were mostly in the early 1800s, who undoubtedly would have been slave owners. There's no doubt about it at all. And incidentally, just to confuse the historical narrative too further, the famous Scots lawyer to whom you referred, who was involved in the slavery case on which Lord Mansfield adjudicated, was Henry Dundas, who himself has had his statues removed in Glasgow recently because he was a slave owner. He was campaigning for the abolition of slavery in the UK while actually owning slaves overseas himself. So these are complicated waters, and I think the moral of the story is that the hypocrisy of the ruling class knows no bounds in any age.
John Stuart Mill as well, was part of the Scottish Enlightenment. He was like a big shot in the EIC, East Indian Company, I believe, if I'm not. Yeah,
he was secretary of the East Indian Company. Again, it fascinates me. One thing that really interests me in history, I'm a devotee of Mill. His philosophy has a great influence on me, but he managed to divorce his philosophy from his everyday life running the East India Company, and has been followed up. I have, I think, 5 different biographies of Mill on my bookshelves, and none of them devotes as much as a page to his job, which was working for the East India Company. All the biographies of him talk about his home life and his wife and his depression, his education, his philosophy. None of them actually mentions that every single day of his, adult life, during working hours, he was working as secretary of the East India Company. Well, they mention it as his job, but they say nothing whatsoever about what the East India Company was actually doing, or about his effect on the East India Company and what he was directing. It amazes me how we've managed to compartmentalize these things in history, and how so much of the history that we learn at school and even at university is just extraordinarily partial and biased in a way that I myself never really fully understood until very recent times.
He did. He was responsible for the writing by Thomas Carlyle of that 1,000-page epic 3-volume set on the French Revolution by Thomas Carlyle. But they had the story about that, right? Can you tell us what happened midway through that book?
Yeah, well, Carlyle had just about finished his 3-volume history of the French Revolution, which I should say is a wonderful work, and everyone should read that. And Carlyle went on himself to become something of a fascist in later life, which we'll pass by. But Carlyle's history of the French Revolution, his account of the key moments of the French Revolution, his capture of the drama of it is really quite extraordinary. But he'd just come to the to more or less the end of his manuscript, which he then left in. He'd been living with John Stuart Mill. He left in Mill's house while Carlyle went back up to Scotland for a while. And while he was away all winter, the maid used the manuscript to light the kindling in the fire. And so 90% of it was burnt. And he had to write the book all over again, which might be why it's so good, possibly. His style probably improved a second time.
I hear that I read somewhere where Dickens read it 10 times. It's a long book, and 10 times.
It's not that long.
Huh? It's the basis of Tale of Two Cities, is that he read and he like used that is because it was from a the sans-culotte point of view. It was from the ground up and not from the king down. Have you read it, Mr. Waters?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because my heart is pumping hard, because my oldest and closest and dearest best friend, who died maybe 15 years ago now, was called Nick Sedgwick, and was a lovely, lovely man, or whatever. One of the gifts he gave me for Christmas 50 years ago, maybe, was a leather, not a first edition or anything like that, but was a finely bound copy of Thomas Carlyle's History of the French Revolution. And I've dipped into it from time to time. Look, Craig's going off to get it out of his fucking bookshelf over there and whatever. And if I was at home in Hampshire, I would go to my bookshelf now and get the copy that Nick Sedgwick gave me all those years ago and pull it out, just like he's doing now. So in 3 volumes, exactly. So I have a very similar set of Carlyle in my thing. And given that you were kind enough to invite me here this evening to talk to Craig and Kelly and you about all of this, next time I go back to England, I'm going to hook those bloody books out of my shelf and bring them back here, to the colonies, and I'm going to read them before I die. And that's a promise.
I would like the two of you to read, chapter by chapter. That would be nice.
I would like to have it here in front of me so I could read some of it out loud to you now.
Craig has
even if it's something dangerously Hollywood, like the storming of the Bastille, in August 1789, or whenever it was. That August?
July 14th, 1789.
July 14th.
1789.
14 juillet. Voilà, Bastille Day. Of course it is. Yes, the 14th of July.
Craig's got a
anyway, he's got it there.
Got it.
Here we are. All 3 volumes.
Yes. Can you read the part where, in the very beginning, I think it's Louis the 15th passes by some poor man somewhere in the forest. I think it's the very beginning. The first 2 or 3 chapters is all about Louis the 15th. It was, and he was such a perverse, depraved individual that and he was on his deathbed a few months later. He never accomplished anything, and I think that was the point that Carlyle was making, that he completely wasted his life. And then it goes on to the coronation of Louis the 16th.
Well, there you go. Apparently, George V, on his deathbed in England, was lying, convalescing, though it turned out he wasn't convalescing, he was dying, in Bognor Regis, which is a small town on the south coast of England. And there he was lying there like that with his eyes shut and his beard and everything. And apparently he went like that. And opened his eyes and he went, "Bugger Bognor," and died. I like that. I hope it's true. I'm sure somebody will correct me and go, "Oh, you lying, bloody bass-playing prick. What the fuck do you know about anything?" Nothing. He never said that. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Craig, you must have a response to that.
No, those were indeed his last words. So I don't think he was in Bognor. I think the doctor suggested to him he go to Bognor for his health.
Oh.
And he replied, "Bugger Bognor," and died.
That's even better, you see.
Well,
This
an
is why I
alternative
like
theory is that Bognor was the name of his valet, but that's
who?
I think an alternative theory is that Bognor was the name of his valet.
Right, we got a few moments left.
And he wasn't even at public school, and he's coming out with those, dodgy
The
jokes.
one thing I want to say, Dan, which certainly here has got insufficient attention, and maybe it got more attention in the States, but I was stunned yesterday while talking of the royal family. I was stunned yesterday to hear that Prince Andrew, in making his defence against being sued for sexually exploiting Virginia Giuffre, that one of the things his counsel were arguing was that it was unconstitutional to have ended the statute of limitations on sexual exploitation of minors in New York State, and that had his lawyer, should his lawyer succeed in that argument, because the judge hasn't ruled yet, then thousands of young people who were abused in New York will lose their right to legal redress, because I believe it was a 3-year statute of limitations on sexual abuse in New York State would be reimposed. And the fact that someone's trying to save themselves by reimposing a statute of limitations that means that, someone who was sodomized at the age of 8 would no longer have any redress, it's just horrible in terms of, appalling, selfish, unthinking, nasty behavior. It's just appalling.
Of course it is, yeah. As a convenience to visiting royalty. It's the whole idea, I've been following this. This brings me somewhat indirectly to a case I've been involved in Holland with a family called Ziada. Ismail Ziada is the son of a man and a woman, and Ziada's brother and a niece and 2 others. 6 of the family were killed by the Israelis on July funnily enough, Bastille Day, near enough, I think, in 2014 in Gaza. I may have the date wrong. And we've been trying to sue Benny Gantz, who's the head of the Israeli Air Force, and the pilot of the plane for their murder as a war crime in The Hague in Holland. And the appeal court in Holland 2 weeks ago dismissed the appeal, but it all came down to the grounds of sovereign immunity. And so I've learned a lot about it, that states cannot be held accountable for war crimes, and unless, and I know you're never supposed to bring up the Third Reich, I know you did earlier and you got away with it, all right, but I'll bring it up now, unless you beat them in a fucking world war, and then you're allowed to, then they can be sued then for war crimes, and you can hang them. You can hang as many of them as you want, and you can hang all the concentration camp guards who were only following orders and who were only electrocuting people to death in terms of the Yale experiment that your not dinner companion Milgren tells us about in all of his writings, wonderful as they are. So it's fascinating, isn't it, that international humanitarian law, IHL as it's laughingly called, has no teeth, and it has no way of getting at the criminals, save that we defeat them in battle first. So you can have a go at Milosevic or whatever he was, you know, the Serbian leader or whatever, but you can't have a go at George Bush or Tony Blair. You cannot bring them to justice, notwithstanding the fact that their crimes outweigh, and Ronald Reagan and the rest of our lot, outweigh the crimes of these minor, petty Balkan criminals by about 1,000-fold. But they are protected by the sovereign immunity of the state. So if you are a state actor, you can do anything you want. You can commit whatever war crime you want, including sticking broken bottles up people's asses in Uzbekistan, and nobody can ever touch you because you are working for the. How weirdly disgusting is that simple fact?
Well, let me just throw this in, Craig. Not only did Tony Blair, I think there was a movement to prosecute him. He got off there. Not only did he get off, but I guess he was recently knighted. What was your initial response to that?
Well, it made me want to vomit, but and it made a lot of people want to vomit. I mean, there's a petition to rescind his knighthood online, which has now got 500,000 signatures, I believe. But I mean, it is merely a reflection. When you think back over the years, probably the percentage of people who received knighthoods from the British government who were war criminals is actually quite high. It's not, you know, it's not exactly a unique or new development.
They get Nobel Prizes. Obama got a Nobel Prize. Kissinger got a Nobel Prize. Even though he can't leave the country, he's got one of those devices, ankle bracelets. So if he gets near the border, he knows to not go over because he's wanted by so many individuals. I want to close up here with Julian. What Craig is the answer here? What do people do at this point? I mean, the most I can do is to go to a rally, do programs on it, try to get the word out. Did you have any solution to this, what people can do at this juncture?
One thing which has definitely changed, the liberal establishment has changed its spots on Julian. A couple of years ago, there was hardly a newspaper in the world that was prepared to support Julian. Now, not only all the newspapers, but all of the, if you like, respectable human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have finally all come out. So in terms of changing opinion that matters, because short of a revolution, the opinion of ordinary people doesn't matter. In terms of changing people that matters, there has been some progress, and I think that's potentially helpful. But the security state remains determined to kill him. Whether enough liberal establishment opinion can be mobilized to stop them killing him, I'm not sure. It's what but that basically has to be it. Because, as I say, short of a full revolution in society, which unfortunately I don't see coming in the near future, we've really got very little else to work on.
Yeah, I mean, how resilient can he possibly be, being ensconced in this dank, small, cell inside of this dungeon, basically? I mean, Rudolf Hess had plenty, I think you referred to Rudolf Hess in one of your articles, had plenty of room to walk around. But Albert Speer, plenty of room to walk around. This poor guy is in a very small cell. He doesn't get any exercise, no nutrition. I mean, how far do you think he can go with this? Because I know I would have been done by now.
I don't think Julian is very resilient in this respect, and that's no shame. because he's being subjected to conditions nobody should be subjected to. But there are people who have survived such conditions and worse conditions for longer periods and come out unharmed. I just don't think Julian's makeup is like that. In no sense is that a shame or criticism. I think he's somebody who is crushed and is crushable by these methods, which is of course why the state continues to use them on him. So I'm very, very worried about Julian. I'm worried about him surviving the experience, or if he does survive the experience and we do get him out, I'm worried that he won't be the same man who went in. And in fact, I think we're already beyond the stage where he'll be quite the same man who went in terms of his physical or his mental health. So, no, I think things are very alarming indeed.
Peter Kropotkin, I think, lasted 2 years in the Peter and Paul Fortress in 1871. Somehow he escaped, but he did, I believe, 2 years in a very, basically a toll booth in St. Petersburg. All right, Roger, the same question to you.
Well, what's is it Joseph K. in the trial in Franz Kafka's novel? You know, the first lines, I believe, of that novel are that he wakes up one morning and he's been accused of something and he doesn't know what he is, and and the whole novel really is about the helplessness of, because when you were talking and when Craig was talking about Julian's predicament, I'm thinking, here's this really, really, really clever guy, really clever, really bright, really intensely intelligent man, obviously with a big heart, with a huge notion of what's right and what's wrong, with a great social conscience, with a huge desire to do good in the world, who achieves all of those aims and whatever, and falls prey to these fucking dumb fucks like George Bush and Tony Blair and Biden and Blinken, and every single one of them, compared with him, they're nothing. They're such small, insignificant, disgusting pieces of shit by comparison. And yet he lives in this 8x6 cell, and they're killing him slowly but surely, day by day. And there's nothing that he can do about it except maintain his integrity, like Craig Murray has done through his trials and tribulations, and hope that we out here in free land, you know, me in my little studio, Craig in his library, you in your whatever and whatever, keep shouting from the rooftops our rage and disgust at how we, the people, billions and billions of us, allow these filthy little fucks to behave like this in our faces, as if they were important and as if they ought to be allowed to rule the world. They shouldn't. And I agree with Craig. I don't think the revolution's going to happen tomorrow or the next day, because Big Brother is very, very, very powerful. But all we can do is keep encouraging the choir to sing louder and louder and louder, certainly until they set Julian Assange free, so he can rejoin the choir where he belongs and help us get out from under the jackboot of this neoliberal nonsense that is destroying our planet.
I think, Roger, let me just refer people who want to read Craig Murray's blog. It's at craigmurray.org or .org. .uk. On Twitter, it's Craig Murray, ORG. You get them there. And same on Facebook, you can get them there. Roger, I know that you're on Twitter. It's Roger Waters. You're the only one. There are a few people who've tried to vampire your identity on Twitter. But I want to thank you. And by the way, Craig Murray's book, you can get, it's Murder at Samarkand, and his epic is called Secundra Burns, Master of the Great Game. I absolutely recommend you reading that book. Craig, I want to say thank you, and I give my regards to the family, to Nadira, and everybody. I'm glad that you're back and in action. Any last thoughts before I say goodbye to Roger here? Andrew.
Well, thank you both for your companionship today and these interesting conversations. I think, you know, Roger is right in that we have to keep fighting, and we have to keep fighting in a way that gives us the best hope of success. But even if we felt we had no hope of success, we still have to keep fighting. You know, there's some things that are simply worth fighting for, and Julian's freedom is one of them. And trying to right, you know, the horrible inequalities in the world, and trying to stop torture, trying to stop man's inhumanity to man, is something that should be incumbent on everyone, and it's something which I will continue to work at. And whether I'm effective or not is not the question. If we all keep working at it, we will become effective.
Right. Roger, I'm going to give you the last word here. And I'm going to thank you, by the way, for joining, because this was a fascinating three-way discussion. I learned a lot. I really enjoyed this format today, rather than just a one-on-one. Thank you, Roger, for participating.
Well, thanks for having me on. I can't put it any better than Craig just did then. You know, he's calm in ways that I'm sometimes not, but he always has wise things to say to the rest of us. So it's been a great pleasure being able to talk to Craig this afternoon, and you as always, Randy.
All right. Well, I'm Randy Credico. This has been Randy Credico Live on the Fly on both WBAI and the Progressive Radio Network. You can also get it on Drogfin, our website, Assange Countdown to Freedom.com, and YouTube. We're going to get this out there. I want to thank Kelly Lane, engineer and editor on the other side, who's been very patient, worked very hard, and is recovering from running into a cow at 70 miles an hour. And she's back on her feet today. And this is our first piece of work together since she had that strange accident. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Roger. And we're going to go out with something special. I'm not even going to tell you, folks. And we'll see you next week.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. It is we who plowed the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshops, endless miles of railroad laid. Now we stand outcast and starving mid the wonders we have made, but the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.